The frosting was too sweet, the sun was too bright, and my mother-in-law Beatrice was smiling too much. I stood in the center of our backyard, surrounded by pink peonies and the high-pitched screams of 7-year-olds, feeling a cold sweat prickle my neck. My husband's family didn't do celebrations, they did auditions. And today, I was failing. Every time I moved, I felt eyes on me, judging my dress, my hair, and the way I handled the chaotic energy of 20 children. The air was thick with the smell of charcoal smoke and expensive French perfume, a clashing mixture that made my head spin. I tried to catch my husband's eye, but he was busy laughing with his cousins, oblivious to the storm brewing in his mother's gaze. There was a specific kind of tension in the air, the kind that happens right before a lightning strike. I could feel the plastic balloons rubbing against each other, making that shrill, grating sound that set my teeth on edge. I was the host, but I felt like an intruder in my own home. Everything looked perfect, but underneath the surface, something was rotting. I just didn't know how deep the rot went yet. The sensory details of the day are burned into my mind like a photograph. I can still smell the vanilla frosting and the metallic tang of the silver platters. I remember the sound of heavy wooden chairs scraping against the patio stones every time someone stood up to offer a fake toast. My name is April Seals. I am 32 years old, and I have spent the last 7 years trying to earn a seat at a table that was never built for me. I grew up in a normal, loving home, but I married into the Sterling family, a name that carries more weight than gold in this town. My husband, Marcus, is a good man, but he is blinded by a lifetime of his mother's manipulation. To the world, I am the lucky girl who married a prince. To Beatrice and her daughter Mallory, I am a stain on their pristine white carpet. I am a pediatric nurse, a job I love because it requires honesty and care, 2 things that are completely absent from the Sterling household. Today was my daughter's 7th birthday, and I wanted it to be perfect, but the weight of their judgment felt like a physical burden on my shoulders. As I moved through the crowd, refilling juice boxes and wiping sticky cake fingers, Beatrice intercepted me near the drink station. She looked like a queen surveying a conquered territory. Her silk suit was worth more than my first car, and her jewelry clinked with every movement. She leaned in close, pretending to fix a stray hair near my ear. Her breath smelled like expensive mints and cold ambition. "You look tired, April," she whispered, her voice a sharp contrast to the bubbly birthday music playing in the background. "It's a shame. You're just a leech draining the life out of this family's reputation. Don't think for a second you actually belong at this table just because you gave birth to a Sterling." The words hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. A leech. It was a brutal label that summarized years of quiet abuse and constant judgment. She didn't see me as a person, she saw me as a parasite. This was her villain declaration, a clear statement of the power dynamic she intended to maintain. I felt a surge of instant anger, but I forced my face to remain a mask of professional calm. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. The emotional debt I had accumulated over the years felt like it was finally reaching its breaking point. For nearly a decade, I had swallowed every insult and ignored every forgotten invitation to family dinners. I had been treated like a burden that Marcus was unfortunately stuck with. I remembered the time Mallory laughed at my shoes during a charity gala, or the way Beatrice would speak over me as if I weren't even in the room. They viewed my career as a nurse as a cute little hobby rather than a noble profession. Every holiday was a minefield of backhanded compliments and passive-aggressive gifts. They wanted me to feel small, and for a long time it worked. I lived in a state of constant self-doubt, wondering if I really was dragging Marcus down. But today, something shifted inside me. Seeing the way they looked at my daughter, as if she were a trophy rather than a child, ignited a protective fire in my heart. The audience of guests saw a happy family, but I saw the layers of insults and the years of being treated like an outsider. I was tired of being the underdog. I was tired of waiting for justice that never came. I needed a moment to breathe, so I headed toward the kitchen to prepare the sparkling cider for the adult toast. The house was quiet compared to the backyard. As I approached the kitchen door, I stopped. It was cracked open just an inch. Through the gap, I saw Beatrice. She wasn't supposed to be in here. She was standing by the counter, holding my specific monogrammed glass, the one Marcus had given me for our anniversary. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I watched, frozen, as she pulled a small vial from her designer clutch. With a steady hand, she tapped a fine, white powder into the liquid. She didn't look nervous. She looked focused. She used a small silver spoon to stir the powder until it vanished into the amber liquid. My brain screamed in confusion and terror. Was she trying to kill me? At my daughter's birthday party? The narrative lightning strike hit me with full force. Everything changed in that second. This wasn't just family drama anymore. This was a criminal act. The transition from tension to a possible poisoning was so sudden that I felt dizzy. I stepped back into the shadows, my mind racing. Most people would have burst through the door, screaming and accusing her. But my years as a nurse took over. In a crisis, you don't react emotionally, you act strategically. I took a deep breath, forcing the adrenaline to sharpen my focus instead of clouding it. I stayed silent, watching through the crack as she set the glass back on the tray in a very specific position. My silence was my strategy. If I confronted her now, she would just pour it out and call me crazy. I needed her to think her plan was working. This calm signaled a shift in the power dynamic. I wasn't the victim anymore, I was the observer. I understood now that she didn't want to kill me, she wanted to humiliate me. Based on the amount of powder, it was likely a powerful, fast-acting laxative or a sedative. She wanted me to collapse or lose control of my bowels in front of the town's elite guests. She wanted to prove I was unfit and messy. I became the strategic underdog, a role I realized I was very good at playing. I waited until she left the kitchen before I moved. I entered the kitchen and stared at the tray. The spiked glass sat there, looking innocent. I heard footsteps. Mallory was coming in from the patio. She was Beatrice's favorite, a spoiled woman who had never worked a day in her life. "April, where is the drink? I'm parched," she snapped, her voice dripping with her usual disdain. This was the moment. The viral nucleus of the story. I picked up the tray with steady hands. "I'm so sorry, Mallory. Here, take this one. It's the most chilled," I said, handing her my monogrammed glass. She didn't even say thank you. She grabbed the glass and took a massive, thirsty gulp. My heart was pounding so hard I thought she could see it through my chest. Justice, suspense, and a massive power shift all exploded at once. She finished half the glass in seconds. "Tastes a bit metallic," she muttered, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Typical. You can't even get the drinks right." I just smiled, a small, tight smile. "I'm sorry you don't like it, Mallory. Why don't you go back out to the garden? The toast is about to start." What happened next was a psychological pressure cooker. I followed Mallory back outside, carrying the rest of the drinks. I didn't do anything. I didn't say anything. I just watched. I started a mental clock, counting the seconds. I watched Beatrice's face as she saw Mallory holding my glass. I saw the exact moment her eyes widened, the moment the blood drained from her cheeks. She looked like she wanted to scream, but she was trapped. To stop Mallory from drinking more would be to admit she had tampered with the glass. I moved through the crowd, acting the part of the perfect hostess, while the tension built to an unbearable level. Every time Mallory took another sip, Beatrice flinched. The delay turned the sunny afternoon into something dark and heavy. I watched the faces of our guests, the local politicians and business owners, all oblivious to the drama. The suspense was a physical weight. I felt like a scientist watching a chemical reaction reach its boiling point. I remained the calm center of the storm, leaning into the silence and the stretching of time. The public consequence arrived during the singing of Happy Birthday. We were all gathered around the cake. The sun was hitting the candles, and everyone was smiling. Suddenly, Mallory's face turned a horrific shade of gray-green. She let out a soft groan that was caught by the silence between verses. Then, the powder took full effect. It wasn't just a stomach ache. It was a violent, uncontrollable reaction. She lurched forward, unable to reach the house in time. In front of 50 of the most prominent families in the county, the Sterling heiress suffered a complete and messy loss of dignity. She collapsed into the 3-tier custom cake, her designer dress ruined, her screams of embarrassment echoing off the brick walls of the patio. public exposure is 1,000 times more powerful than a private argument. The gossip started instantly, whispers behind hands, shocked gasps, and the frantic clicking of tongues. Beatrice was frozen, her social power evaporating in real time as her favorite child became a laughingstock. The real punishment wasn't the sickness, it was the fact that everyone saw the perfect Sterlings fall apart in the dirt. In the middle of the screaming and the chaos, I did something that protected my moral shield. I didn't laugh. I didn't point. I immediately dropped to my knees next to my daughter, Chloe. I turned her away from the scene, pulling her into a protective hug. "It's okay, sweetheart. Auntie Mallory is just very sick. Let's go inside," I whispered, my voice thick with fake concern. I remained the picture of the compassionate mother and the professional nurse. While Beatrice was shrieking and Mallory was sobbing, I was the one maintaining order. I ushered the other children toward the bounce house and directed my husband to help his sister. By staying calm and focusing on my daughter's well-being, I protected my likability in the eyes of the guests. I wasn't the vengeful wife. I was the hero of the hour who stayed grounded while the in-laws lost their minds. This was a crucial part of my plan. I needed to remain the person everyone trusted so that when the truth eventually came out, my word would be law. I led Chloe into the safety of the house, leaving the carnage behind. Marcus came into the house 20 minutes later, looking like he had aged 10 years. He found me in the kitchen, quietly cleaning up some stray plates. I didn't attack him with the truth immediately. I waited for him to speak. "I've never seen anything like that," he whispered, sitting heavily at the kitchen island. "My mother is acting strange. She's terrified, April." I walked over to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Marcus, I have to show you something." This was the ally reveal. I took him to the back porch and pointed to the bushes where I had seen Beatrice throw the empty vial during the panic. I had retrieved it while she was busy with Mallory. I held it up in a plastic sandwich bag. "I saw your mother put the contents of this into my glass. Mallory drank it by mistake." The look on his face was one of pure, shattering realization. For the first time in our marriage, he didn't defend her. He didn't make excuses about her stress or her personality. He looked at the vial, then at me, and I saw the scales fall from his eyes. He finally listened. The identity transformation began that night. I realized that the victory wasn't just about Mallory getting sick or Beatrice being embarrassed. It was about me deciding that I was done being small. I sat Marcus down and told him that things were changing. No more leech comments, no more skipping holidays. I told him I was cutting contact with his mother and sister entirely, and if he wanted to remain in my life and Chloe's life, he would have to choose. The story evolved from a simple act of revenge into a journey of liberation. I felt a sense of power I had never known before. I wasn't the girl who needed their approval anymore. I was a woman who had outsmarted a predator. I began reclaiming my worth, piece by piece. I told Marcus that our home was no longer open to people who sought to harm me. This wasn't about being petty. It was about setting a boundary that should have been there years ago. I watched him nod, seeing him finally respect the strength I had been hiding behind my nurse persona. My life was finally mine again. The next morning, I thought the storm had passed, but a new question arose. Why would Beatrice take such a massive risk at a crowded party? I started digging through the mail and the office files while Marcus was at work. I found a hidden legal folder tucked inside a drawer Beatrice often used when she stayed over. As I flipped through the pages, my blood ran cold. It wasn't just about the party or a single insult. Beatrice had been quietly compiling a dossier of my supposed failures as a mother. She had notes on every late shift I worked at the hospital, calling it child abandonment. She had photos of me looking tired, labeled as evidence of substance abuse. The powder in the drink wasn't just to make me sick. She wanted a documented medical emergency on my record. She wanted me to be hauled away in an ambulance so she could file for emergency custody of Chloe the very next morning. The hidden threat was a full-scale war on my motherhood. She didn't just want me gone, she wanted to take my child and raise her as a proper Sterling. I sat on the floor of the office, the papers scattered around me. The level of premeditated cruelty was staggering. She had been planning this for months, smiling at me while sharpening the knife, but she had made a fatal mistake. She underestimated my intelligence. I didn't go to the police yet. If I did, the Sterling lawyers would bury the case before it even reached a judge. I needed something more substantial than a vial and a story. I remembered that Beatrice was the executor of the family trust, and Marcus had mentioned some financial restructuring she was doing for him. I called a friend from the hospital whose husband was a forensic accountant. I told him I needed a wellness check on a trust fund. I provided the account numbers I found in the folder. If Beatrice was this desperate to get me out of the picture, there had to be a financial reason. Why did she need Marcus to be a single father under her thumb? The answer, I suspected, was buried in the numbers. I spent the afternoon waiting for the phone to ring, the silence in the house feeling like a heavy shroud. The accountant called me back 3 hours later, and his voice was grim. "April, you need to see this." He sent over a series of spreadsheets. Beatrice hadn't just been restructuring the Sterling Trust, she had been hemorrhaging it. For the last 5 years, she had been siphoning Marcus' inheritance into a private offshore account in Mallory's name. Marcus was the one working 60 hours a week to maintain the Sterling brand, but Mallory was the one being set up for life. But that wasn't the worst part. To cover the gaps in the main trust, Beatrice had taken out several predatory loans, using Marcus's forged signature as collateral. The Sterling family estate, the grand legacy she bragged about, was effectively in foreclosure. She needed me gone because I was the only person who looked at the bank statements. She needed Marcus back in her house, so she could control his income and use it to pay off her secret debts. I was a leech, because I was the only thing standing between her and her son's wallet. The financial blow was the key to everything. I decided to set a trap. I called Beatrice and invited her over for tea, claiming I wanted to move past the events of the birthday party. She sounded smug on the phone, likely thinking she could still manipulate the situation. When she arrived, she walked in with her head held high, as if she hadn't just watched her daughter vomit on a birthday cake 2 days prior. "I'm glad you're being sensible, April," she said, sat in my kitchen. "Family is everything after all." I poured her tea, making sure she saw me do it. I didn't spike it, I didn't have to. I just sat across from her and placed the legal folder on the table. "I know about the custody filing, Beatrice, and I know about the powder." She didn't even flinch. She just laughed, a cold, dry sound. "No one will believe a nurse over a Sterling, April. You're still just a leech, and you're irrelevant. Marcus will do what I tell him, as he always has." She was so confident in her social standing that she didn't realize she was walking into a minefield. "You're right, Beatrice," I said, leaning back. "People might not believe me, but they'll believe you." I pointed to the baby monitor sitting on the counter. It was an advanced model that recorded high-quality audio and video, and it was currently live streaming to Marcus's phone. He was sitting in his car in the driveway, listening to every word. Beatrice's face went from smug to ghostly white in 3 seconds. You're recording this?" she stammered. I nodded. "I have you on tape admitting you put powder in my drink. I have you calling me a leech, and I have you admitting you wanted to steal my daughter." But I wasn't done. I leaned in closer. "But that's not even the best part. I also have the forensic audit." I watched her eyes dart to the legal folder. "I know about the forged signatures, Beatrice. I know about the loans. I know the Sterling estate is a hollow shell." The recorded truth was my ultimate weapon. Her power was built on a foundation of lies, and I had just pulled the rug out from under her. The tension reached a new peak as I revealed the most devastating twist. "Why did you really do it, Beatrice? Was it just the money?" She let out a frantic, desperate laugh. "You don't understand. The house, the legacy, it's all I have." She began to spiral, admitting that the family house was scheduled for public auction in 30 days. She had planned to have me committed to a psych ward or a rehab center, using the poisoning as proof of my instability. With me out of the way, she could sell our current home, the one Marcus and I had worked so hard for, and use the equity to save her own skin. She didn't just want my daughter, she wanted my house. She had been willing to destroy my entire life just to avoid the embarrassment of losing her mansion. The secret debt was the real motivation behind the poison. It wasn't about hate, it was about survival. She was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are the most dangerous. I felt a chill as I realized how close I had come to losing everything. The kitchen door opened, and Marcus walked in. He wasn't the man I had married 7 years ago. He looked harder, older. He was holding his phone, the recording still playing Beatrice's confession. "The house is in Leah's name only, Mother," his voice as cold as ice. Beatrice gasped. "What? That's impossible." Marcus stepped toward her, dropping a stack of deeds on the table. "I put it in her name for our anniversary last year. I wanted her to feel secure. You just admitted to fraud on camera, and you just admitted you were planning to sell a house that doesn't even belong to you." The collapse of the dynasty was happening in my kitchen. Beatrice looked between us, her mouth working but no sound coming out. She had lost her son, her secret, and her last remaining asset, all in the span of 5 minutes. The golden sterling sun was finally standing up to the queen, and the look of pure betrayal on his face was the most significant emotional payoff I could have asked for. He wasn't yelling. He was just done. As if on cue, Mallory pulled into the driveway, screeching her tires. She was still pale from her illness, but she was fueled by rage. She burst into the house, demanding to know why Beatrice hadn't sent her the monthly allowance from the trust. "The bank said the account is frozen, Mom. What did you do?" Mallory screamed, ignoring me and Marcus entirely. When Mallory found out that Beatrice had lost the Mallory Fund to pay for the failed loans and that the forensic audit had exposed everything, she didn't defend her mother. She turned on her with a ferocity that was shocking to witness. The two of them began screaming at each other in our driveway, exposing every dirty secret of the Sterling family for the neighbors to hear. They argued about who spent more, who lied more, and who was more responsible for their downfall. The public exposure continued, but this time it was their own voices doing the damage. We just stood on the porch and watched the perfect family tear each other apart in the front yard. I didn't call the police to report the poisoning. As a nurse, I knew that a criminal trial would take years and would traumatize Chloe. Instead, I used a much more efficient legal hand. I handed all the evidence of the financial fraud and the forged signatures to the bank's legal department and the family's estate lawyers. Because the loans were in Marcus's name but clearly forged by Beatrice, the bank didn't go after Marcus. They went after Beatrice's remaining personal assets and the family mansion. I didn't have to lift a finger to get my revenge. The system she had used to protect herself for decades was now the very thing crushing her. She had spent her life obsessed with reputation and standing, and now she was being legally dismantled by the very institutions she worshipped. Marcus and I worked with the lawyers to ensure that the debt was separated from his name, effectively cutting the financial cord that Beatrice had used to leash him to her. We were finally legally free from her shadow. The social death of the Sterlings was swift and absolute. In a town where everyone knows everyone's business, the news of the foreclosure and the screaming match in our driveway spread like wildfire. Within a week, the Sterling name was synonymous with fraud and failure. They were forced to sell their family mansion and move into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in the next county over. For Beatrice, being poor and common was a fate worse than any prison sentence. She could no longer walk into the local country club or look down her nose at the leech in the grocery store. She was the one who had been erased. Mallory's friends vanished overnight once the money dried up. They were left with nothing but their bitterness and each other. The real victory wasn't that they were punished, it was that they no longer mattered. They were no longer the villains in my story. They were just a cautionary tale for the rest of the town. I felt a profound sense of relief every time I drove past their old, empty estate. A year later, on the day of Chloe's 8th birthday, a familiar car pulled up to the curb. It was a beat-up sedan, a far cry from the luxury SUVs Beatrice used to drive. She stepped out, looking 20 years older. Her hair was graying, and her silk suit was frayed at the cuffs. She walked up to the fence, where I was hanging streamers. She didn't look like a queen anymore. She looked like a beggar. She asked me for a loan to help pay for Mallory's latest medical bills, claiming they were still struggling from the incident. I looked at her, the woman who had tried to poison me, steal my child, and ruin my life. I didn't feel anger. I just felt pity. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single $20 bill. I handed it to her through the slats of the fence. "For the gas," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Don't come back, Beatrice. You're not a part of this family's reputation anymore." She took the money, her hand shaking, and drove away without another word. My identity transformation was complete. Marcus and I took the money we had saved from the fraud recovery, money that was rightfully his, and opened a small, independent pediatric clinic. I wasn't just a nurse working for someone else anymore. I was a co-founder and a partner. I had reclaimed my worth, and our business flourished because it was built on the one thing the Sterlings never understood: honesty. I wasn't the budget wife or the leech. I was the woman who had saved her family from the inside out. Marcus had changed too. He was more present, more protective, and finally understood that loyalty isn't about blood. It's about character. We had built a life that was quiet, successful, and entirely our own. I realized that the greatest revenge wasn't the trap reversal or the public justice. It was the fact that I had refused to stay small. I had grown into a version of myself that was unbreakable. Every time I looked at our clinic's sign, I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with the last name. As the sun began to set on Chloe's 8th birthday, the backyard was filled with the sound of genuine laughter. There was no tension in the air, no fake toasts, and no hidden vials. Marcus was at the grill, and Chloe was running through the sprinklers with her friends from school. The air smelled like real vanilla cake and summer grass. I stood on the porch, watching them, and I saw my reflection in the glass door. I didn't see the tired, stressed woman from a year ago. I saw a woman who had defended her home and her heart without ever losing her soul. I had flipped the board, and in the process, I had won the game I never wanted to play. The story was no longer about a poisoning or a betrayal. It was about liberation. I took a deep breath of the cool evening air, feeling the weight of the past finally lift. I was April Seals, and I was exactly where I belonged. I turned back toward the party, ready to celebrate a life that was finally, beautifully mine. If you were in April's shoes and saw your mother-in-law spike your drink, would you have stayed as calm as she did? Or would you have called the police immediately? Let me know in the comments if you think switching the glass was fair play, or if she should have handled it differently. If you enjoyed watching this family's toxic empire crumble, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We drop new, mind-blowing revenge stories every day that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching.